And I guess most of you are there. Yeah, it's about. Thanks. Okay, so let's start. So as you might have seen the course outline, this week we are going to talk about perception, sensation and perception, which are extremely fundamental. So if you think about it, exactly what is happening right now is phenomenal, right? So you are, um, I don't know where you all are located in, but all of you are seeing the same stimuli. If you are seeing your screen, either your computer screen or your mobile screen, you all are seeing the same stimuli, which is a bunch of black letters on a white background. And to a fair extent, almost all of us are understanding the same thing. So even some simple stuff about how you understand slides that get presented in a course is, if you think about it very seriously, it's extremely bizarre, or it's a miracle of how we are able to do such a feat. We don't think about it every day, of course, but if you give a little bit of time and think about it, it's amazing about how we are able to do some such stuff. So what I will do today is I will guide through some aspects of how we are able to make sense of how we read this slide, for example. And to be even more precise, think about it. This one letter here, I, is very different from T. So there is something that enables us to sense different aspects of what in psychology we call a stimulus from its neighboring one, and then all of that and together it's again comes together, all of this into a word, and of course it also has a meaning. Of course you can then expand that to a phrase, and you can put things together, so you know that this together is my name, you know that this all three together is a topic, you know that all these three together is a course. So I want you to go very basic. What is perhaps the first thing that's happening in our head, or wherever you want to pin it down, for us to be able to read? Let's say, just let's focus on I. How are we able to understand that this is I as a letter? Any quick thoughts? Or even any letter as a P or whatever. How do we know that this is the letter that we are pronouncing it to be so?
It's a
We have learned
vacancy
in our
emotion.
beginning period of education. We try to recall from that.
Huh? So
So
recall
it's
is.
something that we have started our education with. So that's
Mhm.
why we have accepted it the way it was taught. And
So
now,
think about the first day. I mean, you can't, but just conceptually, think about the first day you are seeing a letter, say S or P or I. What is happening? The most fundamental things that is happening. Where is it happening and how is it happening? And
So,
all of us went through the same experience.
so we are shown a drawing basically of made by a marker or a chalk, and we are told that this particular thing or drawing is called P, or sounds like P. And whenever this comes in any place you see it, the sound that you'll bring out of yourself would be P or P.
Mhm.
And that is what was shown to us on the first day ever we went to school or something.
Yeah.
Because for us before that, this was just a drawing, basically a line and a curve. We didn't even know that that's a line or a curve. It's just someone just did something on a board or with a tool, and we just saw that something was drawn, and then we were told that particular thing sounded or looked like this.
Yes. See, there are three things, and all the three that a couple of you have already mentioned. One is there is something on a paper, let's say, right? And that something has a certain structure. So first of all, even without naming it, so let's say I don't know what is that called an edge. I don't know, not edge. I don't know what is called a line, right? In fact, the line, the representation of line itself as a line also had to be drawn first, right? So for example, L is more like a line. So it's not L. If you just put it other places, some might read it as one, some might just read it as a line, but still this thing as a line comes later. So this is a association of what you see with a certain word or a sound with it. But I am asking something even more fundamental. What is happening, let's say in my eyes, when this is in front of me?
So the
we
image of L is formed on a retina,
Hmm.
and
Very good.
then from there the optical nerves take the image in the form of electrical signals to the specific area of the brain where something happens that I don't know. Then we are able to, some part of the brain then helps in recalling what we call what was taught to us. We try to mix the knowledge from one part of the brain with the other, and finally a result is produced that we pronounce it as L or any other letter.
Yeah, very good. So we're pretty close to it. So now the earliest part of this process, which is sensing. So first we have to do something called, this is also done in computationally, which is called edge detection. So first we have to detect that this is an edge. How do we know it? We don't. We somehow are able to represent that the kinds of light that gets reflected from the neighboring areas from the white background is different from the light that gets represented from, reflected from this part of the screen, which is a black color. And accordingly, we know that the I is written on the white, not the other way around. So first we have to figure out that there is an edge between the white and here, which is the part of I. You know, I has two edges. Otherwise, if it's one edge, it's one line. It's not I. So we have to understand how we detect edges. Then we have to understand how we are able to put something which is, you know, of an identity on a certain background. So this is called a figure, and the background is called the ground. So this is where the eye is sticking out from the white. And this is still visual. After that, we get associated, or we are taught to learn a certain, sound with this visual, which is called eye. And then the other stuff happens. But even without the association, today what we'll focus on is the visual side to it. How are we able to say this is I, or how are we able to understand a form, or how are we able to understand, bring forms together and understand words or objects, which if you think about it is fundamental. So we are basically doing it right from the time when we are born. And we are not going to stop doing it unless things go crazy or some systems fail in a body. Right? So what we are going to cover today is so fundamental that sometimes we overlook it or we don't pay enough attention thinking that it just happens. But if you put in enough effort, and there are lots of scientists who have put in a lot of research in it, both from psychology and from neuroscience and from computational science, and they now have pretty good idea of how visual sensation or visual perception works. So my job is to run through some fundamentals of here and take some questions and get you interested to see how even something which is so simple, apparently simple, is actually so complex. But of course, I skip a lot of complexity though in the, because it's the first introductory class. So before I proceed, one important facet that has become very important in understanding perception or sensation is to think that our mind or brain, whatever you want to use it, don't use both. I don't like both. I just pick one. Is computational in nature, which means that there are certain kinds of information that are being processed by the mind or the brain that enables us to achieve some kind of thing. So our job is to find out what are those computational algorithms, what are those computational information procedures that help us perceive the world. Okay, so the research agenda essentially would look like how the brain encodes and processes information. I just used brain because I find brain slightly easier to use than mind, but you can use mind also. How do we perceive information about the environment, which is the larger question, and this again is the fundamental way of how we go ahead living lives. Why, when we've perceived information from the environment, we have to attend to a small part of it. We cannot attend to the whole information because then you will go crazy. You can't process everything, so you have to attend to a sub part of the environment, and then you have to process it in the initial stages, which is what typically sensation does. And in that kind of a terminology, if you do want to think about the mind, one way to think about the mind is to say, well, the mind is what the brain does. Okay, so it's the function of the brain. The functional properties of the brain is the mind. What are these stages? So now that if we agree that, let's say, the brain or the mind is computational in nature, we have to spell out the different procedures that enable us to process information. What are those? So here is the external stimuli, which is the stimulus energy. So let's say this slide is my external phenomena. This is fed into my system. This is the internal processes. So first there is a sensory system, which is predominantly comprised of the senses, which is essentially our eyes and nose and ears and touch and taste, which is our tongue. Then there is a process of transduction. Anybody knows what transduction is? Studied in any engineering or sciences? It is a common thing that is taught in science and in high school science, or maybe in first year engineering. Electrical circuitry. No. So essentially, transduction is a process in which you convert one form to the other. So here, the sensory system has to implement transduction, where let's say the frequency of light is converted to neuronal signals, using which you are able to do some kind of detection. So either you can detect some kind of visual stimuli, or you can detect some kind of auditory stimuli. Visual is called iconic, from icon, it's iconic is visual. Echoic from echo is sound, so echoic. Now to be able to process it, I need some amount of storage. So that's why we have some very small amount of storage to store whatever we are seeing right now or whatever you are hearing right now. That then goes into our central nervous system that codes, which means that it forms neural codes for these senses. This goes into memory and it forms a memory, and many a times you also recollect it. And through that we have this overt activity. So whether you are saying something like pronouncing the letter, or you are recognizing the letter, or you are doing something with the letter or the word, or even a face, or it could just simply be a spot of light, whatever you do becomes your overt activity, which of course again is backed in the environment. So this is one very simple but a sequential procedural way to think about how we go about processing information when it comes to sensing the world. Any question? Don't take this linearity too seriously. There's a lot of crosstalk happening and there's a lot of non-linearity that is there, but this is just a simplistic linear diagram.
That was the question, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is more of a conceptual linearity, but not a actual implementation linearity. All right, so we have to define sensation now. So sensation as separate from perception. Yes.
Sir, I have to ask that when we dream in night while sleeping, does it count in covert activity?
What do you mean by covert? I have not used overt and covert till now.
Overt activity.
Overt, O-V-O-R-T?
Yes, sir.
Again, what do you mean by overt here?
Sir, like processing several images and memory. Sir, I could not understand the exact definition of overt activity.
But I have not used overt and covert. I don't know from where you're referring to. But your question about, I mean, is the question that what you dream is that sensation? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, it's echoing there. So people are kind of divided on it. We do know that if you stick in some electrodes in the head, you would be able to pick up neural activity during dreams. And many people believe that you do see in double quotes, you do perceive images when you are dreaming. Now, of course, while dreaming, your sensory systems are closed mostly. I mean, not completely, of course, tactile is open, but typically your eyes are shut, so the visual is kind of closed. But it's not hard to perceive without seeing. And one example of that is when you are, let's say, imagining something, or even there are people who solve problems in their head during problem solving. If you have to, close your head and think, how is the top view of a factory or a machine? You are essentially imagining the machine, how it will look from the top. So you are technically able to perceive the machine with your eyes closed. So pretty much similar stuff is probably also happening in dreams. And the people are kind of divided there because some people think that it's not, or we should not call it perception. It's basically only a memory process that happens during sleep. Whereas some people, especially by finding neural activity in the visual area, while you are sleeping, people conclude that there is some kind of visual perception or visual processing happening when you are dreaming. Okay. All right, so let me proceed. So sensation as distinct from perception essentially means that this is a very early stage process. So this is where you are just detecting energy through your different sense organs from the physical world, and those energies are pure energy. Okay, so it could either be pressure when it's tactile, or it can be frequency, or it can be lumens. Not lumens, sorry, it can be frequency, both for light and for sound. And there are certain areas in your eye or your ear or your skin that pick up vibrations based on that frequency and accordingly convert that frequency into neurochemical neurochemical changes, and that act is called transduction. And if we are able to do it, we say that we have sensed the world, or rather, this is the procedure of sensation. Perception, on the other side, is slightly of a more higher order process, which goes beyond simple detection of energy, and we have to now interpret what we are detecting. So it leads to detection, or sorry, of interpretation of what has already been detected by the sensory information. So to say it simply, initial detection of stimuli is sensation, and interpretation of the things that we are seeing is perception. So to be able to see, this is like a black curve is sensation. To be able to conclude that this is S is perception. And it's also important to figure out that the sensory system essentially is uh, an intermediate between the world you're perceiving and the perceived world, which is what is inside your head.
Sir,
So
I have a
let's,
doubt.
yeah.
Sir, I have a doubt that the illusions that are made for brain are sensations or perception.
I have something on illusions. We'll discuss that, and then you can think what you say, and then we'll talk about it. Okay. I have
Okay, sir.
illusions in this class itself. Okay, so how do we perceive differences? So one way to think about differences or perception of differences is in terms of physics. So here these are two signals, as you might know. These are signals which has low intensity, which means that these two signals overlap a lot between themselves. These are again two signals, but these are signals with high intensity and which has less overlap among themselves. So if we have to figure out the differences between two stimuli, when the signals are of low intensity, we have a difficulty to understand one from the other, and when they separate out, it's easier for us. Very simple stuff. And this is so, did I miss something? No, it's fine. So this is so because of the simple nature of how, sorry, of how the world is situated and how the world is represented using physics. I mean, there's a whole area called psychophysics, which basically studies how psychologically we understand the physical world. It's called psychophysics, psychology of physics. And sensation or perception is essentially psychophysics, that you are able to say this is dark or versus this is less dark, or you're able to say this is more versus this is less, or you're also able to say this is white versus this is black. This is all essentially interpreting physical signals. Either you're able to say distinctions between them, or you're able to do ratio judgments between them when you say, left side has more coins versus right side has less coins. Or you're also able to say, the signal from the noise. Say, for example, if something is shabby, you still figure out, okay, perhaps this is like a face. Or if the faces are very close to each other and they are, you don't know. So let's say I give you to recognize two faces from a different culture, from let's say Chinese culture, and we are not used to recognizing Chinese faces. Maybe the faces look too similar to you. If the properties of the faces have a lot of overlap, which is essentially two low intensity signals. And if they are far away, then you are able to do it. So D prime gives you a measure of error given signal intensity. And now you have a clear graph that depending on higher intensity of the signal, your ability to separate them out or to kind of perceive one is different from the other also goes up. This is basic signal detection theory that is also true. That is true, or that is borrowed from physics or more recently from engineering. And this is also the same thing in the way the human or all of our perceptual system works. Now, if you go a little more deeper, this is how I think of it in its overall complexity. So this is what is happening. Here you have a stimulus. Here you have light waves coming in, hitting your eye. As somebody said, an invert image gets created in the back wall of the retina here. This is taken by the optic nerve to your visual system processing. Here you have 5 levels of visual processing from V1 to V2, V3, V4, and V5. Once you go to V5, you have other processing coming in from parietal cortex and memory coming in from temporal cortex, and something else coming in, so like kinds of decisions or judgments coming in from your prefrontal cortex, which is towards your front part of the head, all put together. All this process is put together, please remember, not just the sensation. All this process to put together is the visual perception of a car. So visual perception, it turns out, is a very, very complex process. It's not a simple one, as sometimes people treat it as if so. There you will hear people saying, oh, creativity is a very complex process. Or let's say stereotyping is a complex process, or purchasing is a complex process, but perception is a simple process. That's wrong. Visual perception turns out to be an extremely complex process, but it's a process that's much better understood and hence much better computationally modeled. And that's why now you have a lot of computer software which is able to do visual processing. But whether the computers perceive the car is contentious, perhaps not. Whether the computer perceives the car as the human brain perceives it, even if both the human and the computer is able to say this is a car and this is not a car, that also is not clear. All that we are doing is we are computationally modeling visual perception. But that doesn't mean what we have modeled is almost similar or exactly similar, worse, to how processing or visual perception happened in the human head. Okay. Any questions at this stage? This is a little difficult to understand, so I'm just kind of going slide by slide. No, fine. Okay, good. Now I go even more deeper, and this is a diagram that actually breaks up the process even further. So let's say this is a static green object, which is a tree. Now what's happening? Let's look at the physics and biology part of it. So first, you have light rays, which are ambient, non-coherent photons, as you might know, which are hitting the tree. From here, you have reflected green photons from the object, which is shot back, and they are entering the eye, and the inverted image of the tree gets created on the back side of the eye, which is on the retinal wall. This retinal wall links, or rather the optic nerve links the retinal wall to this area, which is called the V1 area, which is for visual processing. Here this is zoomed in. Here you see that you have a biophysical picture of objects by biophotons. These are called biophotons because essentially this is the first level, which are transducing photonic activity into neural activity. And here you have what is called visual V1 area, where different kinds of neuronal structures are representing this tree. If you go deeper down, you will see that this actually is a three-dimensional block, or sometimes called blob. Each have its own layers of neurons. Neurons are these kinds of cells in the brain and in other parts of the body, but here we are talking about the brain. And they come in different shapes and sizes. This is one kind of a shape that neurons take. Each of these columns, which are also called hypercolumns, have a whole bunch of neurons within them, which eventually fire. Fire means they get activated neurologically or neurochemically, not neurologically, sorry, neurochemically. And of course, these are individual cells, so you have mitochondria and all for each of them. This whole set of neural activity helps us to realize that you are seeing a tree. All right. All of this is happening in your head when you're able to see a tree, and we just look at the tree and say, oh, such a beautiful tree. No, we never realize how complex a process just happened in our own bodies. Now, if you think about it, I mean, take a minute and think that this is phenomenal. Every time you see a tree, you should realize how great a thing it is that we are able to perceive a tree as a tree. It's not obvious, right? Now, what I was trying to say is, if you now write a computational algorithm, including, let's say, a neural network algorithm that is able to understand this as a tree or label this as a tree, that may or may not mean that the algorithm that you implemented is exactly same or even similar to how the algorithm is in the human head. Okay, these 2 points clear, everybody? Any questions?
Sir, it means this algorithm is assumed.
It's an as if algorithm. So, you can have multiple algorithms to reach the same output, right? So here we have one algorithm in our brains and we have one algorithm in our computers. Both are able to point out that what they are seeing is a tree, but they may or may not be identical. That's what it means. However, because a lot of work, especially neurological work, neurochemical work has happened on visual perception, many of the more recent neural network algorithms that model perception, that model visual perception, many people argue that they if not in totality, at least they do represent some kind of, possibly they do represent some kind of similarity of how we are doing it in our brains. By the way, here you see that these different columns represent the left eye, and then the right eye, then the left eye, then the right eye. Nobody knows the reason why this is so, but this is how nature has created us. You have alternate columns that is representing the left and the right. Some people argue that this is because of adding redundancy, and probably that's true, that it's very unsafe to put all the lefts together and all the rights together. What happens if a certain stroke happens or a hole gets created in your head because of a stroke? Then all of this is going to go bad at one go. That's one position. Okay, so let me proceed further. Now, the first thing is, how do we interpret the word? This is a classic question that has been posed by philosophers and thinkers for thousands of years. So, and there are three major positions, as you see on the screen. The first one is called a nativist position, which means that, and this was given by René Descartes, who said that knowledge is innate. So we already have knowledge about the world, a lot of it. It's also called given a priori. You don't need anything. You already have knowledge about the world. Anybody can give some kinds of proofs or some kind of counter proofs to this position, a nativist, whether you agree or disagree with it. What do you think? I mean, does this make sense, or it's kind of crazy to think about this? That we have all the knowledge that we need, or at least a large part of what we need, a priori. A priori means we don't have to learn it. We are basically born with it.
Sir, I had read an article about nativist theory that many children are segregated from their childhood when they get born, and they live in seclusion, but they do not catch up knowledge after that. Many remain undeveloped till they reach adolescence. Sir, is that true?
Yeah, so does this disagree, or I mean, is this a position against nativism?
Sir, against nativism.
Okay, yeah. There is indeed some such evidences, anthropological evidences.
Can it one more reason in support of the nativists is like the religious scriptures that are given were given by generally one person. So can that can also be given that, I mean, it comes from within. If we look at this Quran or any other scripture.
There is a problem there. You can't use it as a scientific fact because we have no clear evidence that it was given by one person. It's a belief system, and I think almost all religions of the world basically entice one or a couple of people with their religious texts, but that's hard to scientifically justify. I mean, it's still not clear whether this is true scientifically. But there are other examples that you can pick up from things that all of us can experience in support of it.
Sir, if the knowledge was innate, then how can we say that more certain section of the population is responsive to a particular language and not to the other? If knowledge was innate, then we should have been able to speak all the languages. We should have knowledge by birth. Why is it so then?
Yeah, so that's why it is a position against the nativist position.
Sir?
Right? But I'm saying, is there one example that you can give anybody supporting the nativist position?
Sir, one of the greatest musicians of all time, Beethoven, was deaf. He could not hear. Still, he was a great musician. Maybe this could be in support of innate talent.
Innate talent. Talent is even
Beethoven actually became deaf.
No, sir,
after a while.
nativism.
Initially, he was not.
Beethoven only became deaf when he became old. I think kids by birth know that pain is bad, so this is a kind of knowledge which is innate.
So do we know pain is
Sir,
bad? Is there knowledge? Wait, one by one, please.
Bad,
So
bad in the sense it is something which is to be stayed away of. In
yes,
that.
no, you're right. You're right. But I was curious about one word you used, saying no. So is pain being repulsive or aversive or to be avoided a knowledge or something else?
sir, I think knowledge is not innate. Intelligence is, because all the animals on this planet are born and they perceive the same environment, but humans and the other animals perceive different things. They sense the
Okay.
same environment but perceive different things like color and intelligence and knowledge, etc. So I think knowledge is acquired and intelligence is innate since birth.
All right. So that's another debate about intelligence. So I mean let's just stick with knowledge because intelligence has a very complex and complicated history. Um, but
Sir, I think
but
the
before yeah
knowledge
one
that
one minute. But before that, what you said, think about it. Um, if let's say you have a bicycle in front, let's say your friend is looking at the bicycle and you have a dog who is also looking at the bicycle. So are both perceiving it as the same thing? You don't have to answer right now. Think about it because we are talking about perception. Because perception, I said, is a pretty complex process. So we can have a lot of very interesting conversations just on perception itself. So this is one thought experiment I give you. You have a bicycle, you have a human, you have a dog, both staring at the bicycle. Are they perceiving the same thing? Yeah.
Sir,
It's
I
just
think
this is again from the knowledge side, not from an intelligence side.
Sir, I
Oh,
think
sorry. Yeah.
they are seeing the
That,
bicycle as same as visual perception. According
okay.
to the visual perception point of view, there is only difference that the dog sees black and white and we sees it in color. I think both dog and the man have the same visual perception about the shape of the bicycle.
No, so that's the difference, right? So what I'm saying is, or what I'm trying to say is that the the phenomena of perception involves other things, not just seeing. It involves memory, it involves
So,
decision making, it involves judgments.
so
No,
do you mean
it's
motivation?
complex.
So do you mean that motivation could be influencing our perception of things?
Yeah, everything can color perception. Perception, including visual perception. So what probably you're referring to is a color perception or edge detection or or curve detection, which is making sense of an object. But even there it's a problem because what we perceive an object is dependent on our memory systems and our language systems and our prior experiences. So that's why even not perhaps even two humans might not see the same thing and perceive it in the same. Of course, when it's a human and a dog, they are perceiving completely different things. Because perception, that's what I was trying to tell you. Right? So see, it's not just here. Perception actually involves the whole brain. There are multiple feedback loops, and thus requires memory, thus requires emotion processes, prior experience, motor control, judgments, decisions, many stuff. That's what I'm trying to say. That visual perception typically in lay commonsensical language and even in commonsensical usage is thought to be a very simple process, but it is not. It involves the whole brain most of the time. All right. Yeah. So what was one other example of the supporting the nativist one that I just cut somebody?
Sir, like Descartes, I guess, is not mentioning the knowledge as intelligence because, like, knowledge, like what I can think that he meant it as a basic, like, cognitive skills that are being there since from birth. Like, we are able to handle, we are able to interpret some of the things from child, as a child, like movements or like things. So, uh, I think that is he was mainly aiming at. The general, what we can say, the cognitive skills or some sort of things which is very basic at very basic level. They are already inbuilt in us. We do not need to learn it from somewhere else. And as
Right. So
well as
what do you mean by basic?
So like processes that are occurring in our body, like, and like some of our that movements or motor skills are there. And if we see a child, he is like the movement that he does, like we do not need to. It's like although he is although he has learned most of the things from the surroundings or the language that he has learned is by hearing the people that is speaking around him or like from his parents mainly. But most of the things
मैं
are
गई नहीं,
there.
मैं तो ये
They are there
बाहर
in
करते तो और क्यों जाऊंगी?
you.
कल ले आऊंगी मैं। अभी आप नहीं थे, फिर आप फिर पिछली बार जैसे डांट दोगे,
Tamanna,
इसलिए मैं
you have to mute yourself.
सॉरी
Or
सर।
Shweta, I don't know. It's okay. No problem. Yeah, sorry. Where were we?
Yeah, so the basic
Ah,
knowledge.
yeah. So yes, so probably that's the difficulty. So let's look at other people, and then perhaps we'll converge. So the empiricist approach, of course, is the opposite to that. They say that our knowledge comes to us a posteriori from the senses, either through our sensory experiences or through our reflections on our sensory experience. So this is by Locke and Hume, again, great philosophers. So they are saying that it's coming from two things, really, not just from our senses. As I was saying, so imagine if I am closing my eyes and imagining something, or reflecting on our existing experiences, or even perhaps simulating posterior experiences, possible experiences. They are still able to help me understand or help me, you know, enhance my knowledge. But I'm doing it predominantly through experiences, either real or simulated or from memory, but all are experiences nevertheless. So our knowledge, the source of our knowledge essentially is that. Right. So for those who play music or sports, many a times you are advised by the coaches to sometimes either shadow practice or sometimes to close your eyes and imagine playing it. Like for example, if you're learning to play a guitar, or you can also simulate other kinds of experiences, right? Including imagining how it would be like to drive a bike or a fast bike. Let's say if you drive a slow bike, whatever. But all of these are the essence is experience. That's what Locke and Hume says. So all our knowledge essentially comes from experiences. Kant provides kind of an intermediate thing, which I think was coming out from our discussion about Descartes. So he says that most knowledge is acquired through sensory experience, but sensory experiences are themselves structured by innate schemata. He calls that synthetic a priori. So he says that yes, we do learn from our senses, but how do we interpret our sensory experiences? Our ability to interpret sensory experiences are given to us
Hello.
before we are born.
But they can be an exception, like yeah, of Helen Keller. I mean, she was deaf, she can't speak, and she can't also see, right? But she also wrote 2 books, so they can be an exceptionist in this sense, in this definition.
So if you are deaf and if you are blind and you are writing a book, right? That's the case. What does it show or what does it disprove? Are you saying that learning of language or language of thought, as Fodor says, is contingent on experience?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it build up with the time. I mean, yeah, can be. I mean, they are not necessary for learning, but they might help.
Yeah, but I mean, there were experiences coming in. There were experiences not coming in from the two senses, but there are still experiences coming in.
Yeah.
Right? So what Kant is saying is, when experiences come in, how will I be able to structure them? So as an example, he says that the idea of causality is innate within ourselves. What is causality? The sense that any event is caused by some other event. So there is some kind of a temporal ordering of events. For example, if I am sensing an apple falling, I somehow are already able to causally attribute the fall of the apple to something. You can attribute it to God, you can attribute it to wind, you can attribute it to, a bird which sat on the tree, fine, but something that caused the apple to fall. Now, who taught me that the world is made up of causes and events? Did any of our nursery or KG teachers ever teach us that for every event there has to be a cause? Or even worse, even before you have language in you, there are experiments done on 6-year-olds who obviously don't understand and cannot say language. There is a ball which is thrown to another ball. After the first ball hits the second ball, their eye gaze, the kids, which is a 6-month-old kid, their eye gaze is directed away from the second ball, as if they already know now the second ball is going to move in a certain direction. Who taught them that if a ball hits another ball, the ball has to move? Or the movement of the ball is later in time compared to the throwing of the ball. So that kinds of examples Kant uses and says, these are things that are innately there in our system. And we are experiencing the world, or we are able to experience the world because we have this innate schemata, which he calls synthetic a priori. Okay, this is different from saying innate other kinds of knowledge. So there are some innatists or nativists say that. So
I mean, we can put what then categorize the knowledge, and then we can discuss on how we can consume the knowledge in a maybe.
What? Sorry, I could not follow what you said.
Then it can also be depend on what kind of knowledge we are perceiving or consuming. I mean, these are the I mean, just you give an example of a kid, then it is also based on just observing. But if I talk something about like that we are discussing this thing, then we have we have to do discussing much like things like that.
No. But knowledge, so don't take knowledge to represent only propositional logic or first order logic, which means that knowledge is not just, let's say, maths or facts about the world and stuff. Knowledge is used here in a much more broader sense to also capture things about beliefs regarding physical objects, including movement or motion. And this is what helps us to lead normal lives. I mean, you don't really need to know what is the capital of what, or you don't need to know calculus. You basically need to know that if a ball is coming and towards me, is it going to hit me or not? Right? So these kinds of things which are completely in the physical interactions is a very important aspect of knowledge. What Kant is saying is that many of these knowledge, including the facts parts also, but here he is talking of more world knowledge. And he's, by the way, remember, he's not just talking of humans, he's talking about,
I mean,
beings.
Can we say that the knowledge that you are talking about is the elementary knowledge? I mean, it's the necessary of the human. If a human being is born with, with any defect, then he will eventually gain all this knowledge. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to go any school or college.
Yes, that's true. And not just human beings. I think about animals also. So rodents, or rather a lot of mammals, not humans, you can't feed even small babies. You can't feed them what they are not supposed to have. They just don't have it. They're also able to figure out what is stale and what is not stale. They are able to figure out whether this is my food or this is not my food. Right? So from where does this come from?
Sir, instincts.
And now we have to explain where instincts come from. In fact, very recent work in in genetics has shown that even a very higher order traits, including whether people are pro-social or not, which you think is very, very high, right? It's basically the social psychology stuff. There are genes even that code for such kind of behavior. There are genes now which say that whether this person is going to be more risk-taking or less risk-taking. So genetic information, the kinds of knowledge that is coded in genetic information, we are just starting to discover. And a lot of this people think is part of a genetic markup, which is, a kind of thing towards the nativist position. And there are examples, let's say in language, which Chomsky talks about, that you have a structure of language that you are built with. Now, depending on whether you're born in India or you're born in Netherlands, you already have the structure in your head to learn a grammar. Which grammar you learn, which language you learn will be driven by where you're born, which is basically your by the empiricist position through your senses or through your experiences. But the ability to learn grammar, you're born with it. Similarly, the ability to say that some event is happening before an event, which is the temporal sequence of events, or to be able to say this is a cause and this is an effect, and cause affects other things. So there's a cause-effect relationship in the physical world. We are born with it. After that, using our sensory experiences, we are able to interpret the world. This is what, Kant and many other Kantian followers explain about how we perceive the world or how we gain knowledge. But if you think of more abstract knowledge, which is more symbolic knowledge about, say, mathematics or literature or any of the any of the fields of study that we have, they're not really talking about that. Of course, you can't. I mean, at least we don't yet know whether you can have a genetic markup which enables a person to do calculus without learning to do calculus. There are some contentious cases that have floated where they are also called gifted children, where they are able to have certain mental abilities far more or superior than the average population. But how do we define it or how do we explain it is not very clear yet scientifically. Okay. But this is very interesting, right? So that's why we have such wonderful conversations. I do have things about perceptual illusions, as somebody was saying. So what are perceptual illusions? Why does the mind distort reality? Illusions is distorted reality, right? So you are basically perceiving something as different as from what it is. What our sensory systems perceive and what the minds interpret. This is the heart of trying to understand perceptual illusions. So there is something that your sensory system is perceiving, and there's something else that your mind is representing or interpreting. If they are same, then you don't have an illusion, you have perception. But when they're different, that is when you have illusions. Here's an example, many examples, and this is one often cited example. Okay, so sorry, before I explain this, can anybody tell me what's happening here? What do you see and what is the reality? What you see is what your sensory system perceives, and what you perceive or what you interpret is what your mind essentially makes sense out of it. Are they same or different? What are they?
A bigger monster is changing a smaller one.
Same.
Same.
Actually, they are same size.
The size of monsters are same. The illusion is defined by the converging walls.
Yeah, how do you know that these two monsters are same? The size of the monsters are same.
By ignoring the walls.
Why would you ignore the walls? If let's say, think about, okay, so let's say, how many of you are seeing this picture for the first time? Can you raise your hand? Okay, Purvi, anybody else? Ayank, oh, a lot of people. Okay, fantastic. So those who have seen it for the first time, let's hear them out first, okay? Because those who know the thing, they might be a little biased, but we'll hear you all also. So yeah, so among those who have raised your hands, what do you see?
Sir, a bigger man chasing a smaller.
A bigger man chasing a smaller man, or a bigger monster chasing a smaller monster. Everybody sees the same thing. Anybody see something different, or anything additional to
Sir,
that?
sir,
So,
they
sir,
are running.
Sir, it seems that the bigger monster also is scared of and running away from another someone behind it.
Okay.
Sir, they both are running from something that is behind both of them.
All right, but they are both of different sizes, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, not necessarily. It may be the perspective way of he is seeing from a below view.
But it's hard. No? I mean, if you are seeing it for the first time, it's extremely hard. So even if I tell you that these two monsters are of the same size, we somehow just cannot accept it. So there is something clearly happening in our perceptual system that is hellbent to believe that this is a bigger monster and this is a smaller monster, isn't it? Now, of course, we have to explain why that happens and why our system behaves that way, and what does that say about perception. These three things we
sir,
have. Yeah.
sir,
Tell-
sir, when I see this picture with one eye closed, the 3D perception of one being bigger than the other, it does not exist when I see with only one eye,
Okay,
with
is
the
it?
other eye
So
closed.
let's see. Let's see. So everybody do this. Any eye, all right? And look at the screen.
The
How
illusion
many?
somewhat decreases.
So this is what you are saying. So let's see whether it's really happening. You can put down your hands if you have put them up before. Now put up your hands if you can. If you are closing your eye with one hand, and you are still seeing a big man and a small man, then you put up your hand.
That it does not eliminates, it somewhat decreases
Hold on.
in my thought.
It's okay, Ayank. So let's see what really people are perceiving. I mean, I will come to you to kind of explain this also. But
So
Sir,
not
maybe it seems smaller because we always think every because the object which are closer to us is seems to be bigger than the object which is farther from us.
mhm.
Maybe this is the reason we are getting this to be close smaller and this is the larger.
Yeah, but the experience itself, if you think about it, does anybody get a different experience compared to a small and a large man? Anything apart from that?
So there's no change at all. For for some of us, there's no change.
There's no change. Okay. Did you try it with both the eyes? Closing
So,
one eye this way and one eye this way?
yes, sir, yes, sir.
All right. So there's something peculiar about the experience itself. We let's say we don't want to explain anything about the experience or why we have this experience. The experience itself is an experience. We can't get out of it, right? This is a tautology. We are experiencing this. Right? Now the question is, okay, so now how many hands up do we have? About 10 people. Okay, so I am assuming others are listening to the lecture and they're responding. But all right, so now let's try to explain this. Why and what really? Okay, so what is the reality? One is the experience, and the second is the reality. What's the reality now? Yes, go on. Ayank or anybody else.
So I guess the thing that we are seeing is because our mind is thinking that the both the monsters are at the same level.
Mhm.
One that is like uh,
No, what do you mean by thinking? We are experiencing it, no, at
we are
this point.
experiencing. Yeah. The one that is like behind, it is at higher elevation. So our minds are thinking that it is. Sorry, we are experiencing that it is like bigger in size. So I guess that's the reason.
But you are saying that they are small, they are of similar size.
No. I am saying that we are experiencing that like they are at the same level. Like their legs are, their foots are at the same level, and the dragon which is behind, it's like like head is at higher elevation. That's why we are experiencing that it is bigger in size.
Yeah, so that's what you're experiencing, but in reality, is it clear that they are of the same size? So this one and this one is same.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Of course. So now you are basically explaining the illusion of that the reality is that they are of same, but your experiences they are different. Now we have to explain why there's a difference between perception and reality.
So maybe the conversion of 3D, this 3D figure to a 2D sheet over here is, is making us have different perceptions, and people who have already seen this image know what exactly goes on.
Right. So for those who have not seen it before, can any of you try? What perhaps is going on?
Sir, I think it is because of
Sorry, if you raise your hand, then I request any of the TAs to please schedule one after another so that nobody cuts into each other. Okay, so Avantika, can you? Oh, we have a bunch of people. Yes, Avantika, can you schedule them?
Yes, sir, sure, I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, so first, Aryan Sharma.
Yes, ma'am.
You have your hand is raised. If you have a question, please ask it.
Oh, sorry,
No,
sorry.
not a. Okay, not a question really. I am looking for somebody to try to explain what is happening who is seeing the picture for the first time.
Okay, then Abhimanyu Sinha, could you try?
Yes. So I think our mind tries to like um, relate to previous experiences in our past. So like the picture, like when we see the whole picture, so we see the wall and the two men. So we link them. We link these three items, and we see the pattern of the walls converging. So we automatically like this figure becomes more prominent than what is actually present on the paper. So we think that it is so our mind processes it like this: the man behind is bigger compared to the wall size there, and the man in front is smaller. So I think that's what's happening
because of presenting 3D in 2D.
Yeah, because that the walls are more prominent because we have seen it many times in the past. So I think that's the reason.
Okay. Anybody else to
Okay,
follow up on that?
Purvi, you have something to say?
Yes, sir. I think it's because our brain tries to interpret it as a 3D picture instead of just visualizing it as a 2D picture. So if we visualize it as a 2D picture and measure the size of both men, then we can conclude that both men are of same size. But as our brain only wants to interpret it as 3D, so we see the difference in size.
We interpret it as 3D. So this is also how you draw 3D in 2D, right?
Yes, sir. Whenever we want to draw 3D, we just converge or diverge the surroundings, and that's why, because of that, it's interpreting as it is not 3D.
Yeah, great. Very good 2 points. I think that's pretty much at the heart of it. Anybody else wants to say something additional to this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, tell me.
Sir, I want to explain in this way that if suppose there are two person who were standing at a distance in a line and a picture was taken in reality, then what we would see actually was the person who was standing closer would have been seen much bigger in size than the person who was behind. But in this case, our brain or our mind is actually seeing something that is reverse of it. The person behind is at a much higher elevation, so it seems that he is bigger in size. So in total, we perceive that the behind man is monstrous in size, very huge in size. That could be a reason.
Okay. All right. So let's go a little. Well, you all are right. I'm just kind of streamline this explanation. So first of all, if you remember, it has to start here, right? So object size is inferred from perceived distance and retinal size image. This is how we understand, or rather, we infer what is the size of the object, both from the perceived distance and the retinal image size. We, in the sense, this is what the visual processing area in our brain does. Now, if two objects have the same retinal image size, that is, in the physical world, they are of the same real size, the object appearing farther away is seen as larger. This is what some of you were saying, but this is a more concrete way to say it. So you have exactly the same size of the objects, which means that they have the same retinal image, but if you have a distance, then the whatever is away is seen as larger, which happens right here. So actually, physical size of both two are the same, and hence the retinal image that gets created is also the same. But the distance is what gives rise to the size-distance relationship, which becomes the reason for our illusion. This is one more example.
So
You
what
see,
is the difference between perception illusion and perception reality? Means both cases, perception and illusion, and perception and reality.
yeah, so illusion essentially, so this is one more example. You see that if you, I don't know, this is a better one. So this is what the reality is, right? There are two lines of exactly the same size, but they get perceived illusorily, or we get an illusion that this size or this line is longer than this line if you superimpose or juxtapose this kind of a artificial um, you know artificial lines on top of it, which is again similar to what I think Purvi or somebody was saying, that something we interpret 3D as convergence, so something that is converging essentially is more bigger, which many of you were also talking about for the monster example. So this is now Gregory's theory. It says that the visual system makes hypotheses about distance to objects based on evidence in the image. So Gregory is saying that what we do is we form hypotheses, like how you would have research. You would also have hypotheses about the world. Our visual system first makes a hypothesis that this is what the world is. And the hypothesis here is that we can talk about the distance to objects based on what in the image, which is what we did previously also. Sorry, here and even here. So whatever is in the image is what enables us to make hypotheses about the distance of objects. Now, because this is already done, interpretation of size follows. It's not like size comes first. We actually interpret size later based on the evidence in the image, which is happening here. So if you remove this, you have one interpretation. If you put this, you have another interpretation. But size interpretation, it follows the hypothesis about distance. And the difference between illusion and reality, both are perception. One, this is perceptual illusion and this is perceptual reality. Your question is that illusion essentially is when there is no veridical mapping between the object in the real world and the object in your perceptual system. Veridical means if whatever is longer, you also perceive it to be longer. Whatever is shorter, you also perceive it to be shorter. If there is a discrepancy, that is what is called a perceptual illusion. And many a times our perceptual systems are tricked into illusory aspects because of additional things that are there in the environment, because we make hypotheses about distance and many other things also based on the evidence in the image. So we are essentially taking the image as sacrosanct and making a hypothesis about the nature of the objects within it. After we have made it, only then we start interpreting it, including interpretation of size. This is also a very classic talked about illusion, and if any of you are interested, Google up the Ponzi illusion today and you will find a whole lot of fun stuff on the internet. Okay, so I will stop here because of time. There's one question, Tarun. Yes, go ahead with your question.
Sir, so have we been conditioned into this illusion, or is this innate?